Okay, so what do the following things have in common? Frustration, low self-esteem, procrastination, lack of motivation or loss of motivation, sleep problems, mm, indecisiveness, feeling worthless, feeling incapable, feeling powerless. It's just a short list, but what do all those have in common? Well, I'd like to explore that today, and importantly, what might be possible in order to remedy those things. So if you experience any of those things, then uh, today's exploration may be of use to you. So just a reminder that this is Relax into Wholeness. This is a weekly meeting in which we explore topics which support you in self-knowledge. So from my view, self-knowledge is really the aim of life. Whatever else you may accomplish, it's really self-knowledge that matters. And so that's my intention with these meetings is to support you in self-knowledge so that you can really experience the true fulfillment and satisfaction that you're here for. Uh, and all the topics that we explore on a weekly basis are intended just for that purpose. So to approach this from many different angles. And each of those different angles will shed a different light on who you are, what your relationship with the whole is, what you're doing here, and maybe how to do it better so that you can have a more fulfilling experience. So that's what the overall intention is. And today, as I said, I want to explore this particular topic, which I think is relevant to everybody. If I'd be willing to bet it's relevant to you. Uh, if it's, there may be some few individuals on the planet, probably a handful, who this does not apply to whatsoever, except that it still does. Um, so I think you're going to find this useful. So as I said, there's this. I gave this list of these possible things that maybe all have a connection, something that brings them together, something that underlies them. Now, I wanted to be clear, or I want to be clear that what I'm going to share with you today may not be the only cause or reason for those kinds of experiences or symptoms. But it is one very common cause of those kinds of experiences. And as I said, I think it's so common that it probably is something that everybody here is experiencing in some way or another in their life. So, what is it that they all have in common? And what they all have in common is that those are possible outcomes of what's called learned helplessness. And so I'd like to explore what learned helplessness is, how it comes about, what the results are, and most importantly, how you can actually remedy that. Uh, Hopefully, the main focus will be on what you can do to remedy that. In fact, I will even go so far as to suggest that simply by being here and sincerely engaging in this communication in this meeting, you will experience some shift. So that is if I do my job correctly. So fingers crossed. So what is learned helplessness? So learned helplessness is it's a name that was given to a phenomenon that is something that can happen to any of us. And it was a name that was given to this phenomenon by some researchers in the late 1960s. And I'll describe to you briefly about how they came to know about this phenomenon, and then we'll go from there. So if and by the way, I should tell you that if you already think you know something about learned helplessness, then that's fantastic. And as usual with these meetings, I invite you to come with an open mind. So if you think you know something, that's great. You're welcome to keep that if it's useful to you. And in order to make the most of this, it will be helpful if you just are willing to kind of empty your bowl temporarily, at least, and be open to what's here as though maybe it's new. Because the truth is, it is new. Even if you think you already know it, you don't actually know it because what's being shared is something that is unique because it's coming from a particular perspective and it's coming to you now in this moment as opposed to before. So really to have an open mind, to approach everything in life with this open mind, to approach everything as though maybe you don't already know is quite valuable. In fact, it's kind of related to the topic as it turns out, as we'll see hopefully later on. So there were some researchers in the late 1960s who were performing some experiments that led to their understanding of this phenomenon. And they started out with dogs. And now, some of you, if you're sensitive, you may find this idea of the experiments they did offensive. But again, I just want to share with you this knowledge. So keep an open mind. Uh, so here's what they did. They were they took dogs and they divided them into these two groups. We'll call them Group A and Group B. And they subjected them to more or less the same circumstances, the same, more or less exactly the same thing, except for one difference. So they put the dogs one at a time into cages that were electrified, so that the occupants of the cages, the dogs, could receive electric shocks. Now the shocks were designed not to be physically damaging, but to be psychologically distressing. And they also provided the dogs with a button, a means by which maybe they could do something. So there was a button, there were electric shocks. Now, the difference was what the button did. So the dogs in Group A, when they pushed the button, the electric shocks would stop. Group B, when they pressed the button, nothing happened. So that's the difference. So they're both all the dogs are subjected to this unpleasant stimulus. Okay, so they're all receiving this psychologically distressing shock. Uh, Group A has the ability to do something that results in a change in that. Group B does not seem to have any way of stopping it. So then what they did was they then after that they put the dogs one at a time into these different types of cages. And this type of cage, in the second part of the experiment, had two sides to it. One side, which was electrified so that they could deliver electric shocks, same kind of electric shocks that were not meant to be physically harmful but psychologically distressing. The other side, free of electric shocks. And they put a little a little barrier between the two sides that any of the dogs could easily jump over. So what they found was that the dogs in Group A found pretty quickly that they could just leap over the little barrier and they could get to the side where there's no electric shocks. And so they would consistently, the dogs in Group A would consistently jump over the little barrier and get to the side where there were no electric shocks. Group B, dogs in Group B did not move. So a low barrier that any dog could easily jump over and be free of the shocks. Group Group B dogs did not move, did not jump over the barrier. So then the experimenters lowered the barrier, thinking, well, maybe the barrier is just too high. Lower the barrier. Group B still did not move. They said, okay, let's remove the barrier entirely. Remove the barrier. Group B still does not move. So Group B remains in place, subjected to these distressing shocks, whining, but not moving. They are free to move. Nothing externally is preventing them from moving. Dogs from Group A have demonstrated that they're perfectly capable of doing so. Dogs in Group B are not. Uh, then even more interesting, the experimenters then uh, go in, and they're insulated from the shocks. They pick up the dogs and move the dogs to the other side. So then the dogs have the experience of what it's like to be on the other side, free of the shocks. The thinking is, surely once the dog has the experience and knows that if they just go to the other side, they'll be free of the shocks, then they will take action. So they move them to that side. The dogs have the experience. Then they put the dog back on the side with the electric shocks. Group B still does not move. So the experimenters repeat this over and over and over and over. It takes them many, many, many repetitions of moving the dog from the side to the other side and back in before the dogs from group B finally start to take action on their own behalf. So it takes many, many, many repetitions on average before the dog will finally realize that, oh, it's possible for me to move and help myself. So then the experimenters, the researchers give a name to this. They call it learned helplessness. Good name, because that's pretty much what it is, right? They learn to be helpless. So they then proceeded to experiment and find out that, does this exist in other animals? In particular, does this exist in humans? And they found that yes, it does. So they did similar experiments. Apparently, it's ethical, I guess, or at least was ethical, considered ethical, to shock non-humans, but not considered ethical to shock humans. So they used, I think, non-pleasing tones in place of shocks with humans, and outcomes were the same. So when subjected to the non-pleasing, the distressing tones, if the humans have the ability to do something that results in a change, then they do not develop learned helplessness. Those who are not given any means by which they can produce a change and stop or reduce or alter somehow the tones, by and large, develop learned helplessness. So why am I telling you about this? Well, because uh, it's almost certain that you have, as do pretty much every other human on the planet, some learned helplessness in your life. Now, an important thing is that when a person develops, or when a being develops learned helplessness, um, this may or may not generalize one way or another, right? So it may remain very specific to the circumstance, but in some cases it will generalize. So, and how much it will generalize, we don't know. So, and I'm pointing this out because sometimes people might think, well, they get the image of the whining dog, unwilling or unable to move to help themselves, and they think, well, I'm not like that at all, right? I mean, I don't suffer from that problem. I'm very assertive. I take care of myself. I do all kinds of things in all kinds of areas of my life. I brush my teeth and I go to the gym, and I work really hard to make a lot of money, and all the things, right? I set boundaries in my relationships. I do all these wonderful things. So therefore, I couldn't possibly have any learned helplessness. And that's a mistake, because it's not necessarily that when a person develops learned helplessness that it generalizes across all domains of their life, and they just become this sort of helpless, whining creature who doesn't do anything to help themselves. It could, but that would be very extreme. Much more common is that it remains specific to a particular domain, particular circumstances in a person's life, where they are genuinely unable to recognize that they could do anything to help themselves. So the person becomes convinced that they have no internal ability to control things, that all of the control is outside of them. And so as a result, they develop all kinds of strategies and thinking and physiological changes which support that. Now, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Um, if you genuinely cannot do anything to help yourself, then it doesn't make any sense to try. right? I mean, if you genuinely cannot, if it is actually impossible for you to do anything to help yourself, then it would be pointless to try. So I'm sure that there's a good, let's call it evolutionary reason for this. However, uh, the problem is that there's almost always something that we can do to help ourselves. It may not be in the way that we've been thinking about it, but there's almost always, in fact, I'll go so far as to say there's always something that we can do to help ourselves. And so when we learn helplessness, it actually is just a problem for us. Now, people, I know some people are going to they're going to have problems with this because they're going to say, the usual kind of things. They're going to say, well, what kind of loving God would create a reality in which this is the case? Why would learning helplessness exist unless it's just because there's no meaning in life whatsoever, or because God is cruel? And I just say, look, there's no need to go there. I think it's much more useful to acknowledge and admit that there's much that we don't know, and rather than take the position of I know everything and I'm in a position to judge God or life or the universe or reality with a capital R, or however you want to think about it. Maybe don't do that. It just seems to be kind of foolish and hurtful to you. So I'm only mentioning this because I know some people will have that concern, and that will hold them back. But what if, again, just keep an open mind. What if, we could just say, look, this seems to be an observable phenomenon where people do experience learned helplessness, and and it seems to be problematic in people's lives. So why does it exist? Is it a flaw? Is God not truly all knowing? Is it who knows? Who cares? I mean, maybe you care, but what it's just like if you're not in a position to actually know these things, um, don't I would recommend it's not useful to try and take that position because that just keeps you stuck. Instead, I would propose, and this is fairly in line with what I'm going to talk about later in terms of what you can do to help yourself. I propose take a position of an open mind and consider, okay, look, uh, given how things seem to be, what can I do to help myself? I think that's a much more useful position to take. So that's the position I'm going to be taking. Okay, so when a person experiences learned helplessness in some area of their life, then in that area of their life, they are going to perceive that they have no ability to control the things that are necessary in order to have the changes that they want. They will feel powerless, frustrated, discouraged, disappointed. How there may be very many variations on how a person will have their particular take on it, but it will be some kind of thing in that general ballpark. And so again, everybody's going to have their particular flavor of this. Not everybody's, it's not going to be a one size fits all kind of experience. Not everybody's going to, uh, be like the dog whining and whimpering. It's not necessarily going to be like that, but there's going to be the essence of it is a sense that there's nothing that I can actually do that will help me when it comes to this. Now, just think about it. There's got to be something in your life where you feel that way. Probably multiple things. And if that's not clear to you, then rather than just dismiss it out of hand and say, oh, this doesn't apply to me, just I invite you to just consider, just keep an open mind and contemplate over the coming hours, days, weeks. What are those things in life where I may perceive that I'm powerless to produce the change that I want? For some people, it might be in terms of their money. I know a lot of people struggle with money. Obviously, not everybody, but for the people who struggle with money, then oftentimes they've tried lots of things, and yet they just keep coming back to the sense of I can't seem to figure it out, and therefore it must be that for whatever reason I just can't do it. right? Like maybe other people can do it, but I can't. So maybe it's because there's something wrong with me. Maybe it's because it's a cruel joke. Maybe whatever the reasons might be, but there's something that's beyond my ability to cause the change that I desire. For some people, it's relationships. So, it's like, and this can show up in so many different ways, right? I mean, so sometimes for some people, they feel like they are stuck in a relationship, whether that's with their parents or their lover or their children or their whoever, boss, right? So it could be personal, professional, any kind of relationships where people perceive that they're stuck, like they just can't make the change. And it could be things that are overtly abusive, right? I mean, that's obviously a known phenomenon where people stay in overtly abusive relationships and they feel like there's nothing they can do. But it doesn't have to be overtly abusive. It could be more subtle than that. But nonetheless, the person, and it doesn't even have to be necessarily abusive. It's just maybe not good or right for the person. And yet they just feel like they are powerless to really produce a change. And this can, the thinking around this can vary wildly. Some people, their thinking might be, uh, well, I deserve it anyway. I'm no good. I'm worthless. And for other people, they may be very clear, I don't deserve this at all. Nobody deserves this. This is no good. I can't make any change. Even if I tried to make a change, it wouldn't work out. Nothing would work out for me, right? And many other variations. So could show up in relationships, could show up in health. Health is another big one where people have challenges where they feel powerless, right? They say, well, I've tried so many things and none of them work for me. I've tried all the things and either I believe that I've really tried them earnestly and they just don't work for me, or I just can't seem to really make any of them work, right? It's like I know if I would just follow through, if I wasn't just so lazy, or if I was, if I had the willpower or whatever it is that it takes, if I had that, if I wasn't just fundamentally flawed, I'd be able to have a real success with these things, but I can't because there's such something wrong with me. So it can show up in any area of life, whatever that might be. So for some people, it's uh, in terms of their creative expression. They feel like they just can't. They're terrified for a variety of reasons. For some people, they're terrified of being exposed. They don't. They maybe they have a real desire to express themselves in and to share that in a larger way, but they feel absolutely terrified of expressing themselves and being exposed. And so, uh, however it shows up, this could show up in so many ways in your life because it could show up in any domain. Now, if you think about it, so how does it come about? I mean, hopefully, most of us were never put in cages and shocked without, with fake buttons that don't really do anything. I mean, that would be bizarre if that happened. So hopefully that didn't happen to you. But if you think about it, how many of us have not experienced things in our lives that are kind of like that, where we are put into some kind of container and we don't like something about it, but we feel as though there's nothing we can do about it. I mean, kind of by definition, that's how most of us experience a lot of the things in our lives. I mean, the culture that many of us find ourselves in is kind of like that. The culture is kind of like a container that you feel like you really don't have a way to change. So there you are, you just kind of stuck. And so those are the circumstances that are very likely to result in learned helplessness. Now, I should say that not everybody is going to learn helplessness given the same circumstances, because and this will also hopefully be clear when I get to the like what could we do about it part. Um, because it's not the circumstances that dictate the learned helplessness. It's actually, remember, it's when the learned helplessness is when the individual concludes there's nothing I can do. I am powerless. So the circumstances can make that more or less likely for a person to come to that conclusion, but the circumstances don't have the power to dictate what a person will come to believe within themselves. So learned helplessness is not merely a function of circumstance. Not everybody who comes into this world, not everybody who is subject to a particular culture will learn helplessness as a result. So that's just an important thing because I know sometimes people have this idea is like, okay, and this is very much a learned help, a kind of an attitude that comes from learned helplessness is this sense of the power's all out there. Like I would really like to change, but I can't change until the change happens out there. So like the dog who's uh, in the cage being shocked, they, I'm sure they're not consciously thinking like this, but it's got the essence has to be, it's like, you know, I I would really like to not be shocked, but there's nothing I can do about it. Therefore, hopefully somebody else will make the change. So this is how many of us learn to think in life is, I really hope that somebody else makes the change. And this is not to say that making external changes to conditions and circumstances is bad or wrong or inherently problematic, or that that's a bad place to put some attention. I mean, certainly, uh, I think it's wonderful when we do make positive changes in the conditions and circumstances. However, that in and of itself is not actually where we're going to get the real changes that we want. And this is sometimes hard for people to wrap their heads around because they think, well, if only nobody was ever subjected to uh, situations in which they are apparently powerless, then this would solve all the problems. But people can determine that they are powerless given any conditions or circumstances. So for some people, some people will be subjected to, uh, you know, like for example, some people are live in a war zone, and they are, some people uh, are like imprisoned and captured and tortured, and these are circumstances that would make learned helplessness more likely, but not everybody in that circumstance develops learned helplessness in regard to that. On the other hand, there are people who will develop learned helplessness because they they didn't get the candy bar at the supermarket when they really wanted the candy bar, and they're begging their mother for the candy bar, and they don't get it, and so they learn to experience helplessness as a result of that. So it's a mistake to think that we're ever going to create the perfect circumstances that will guarantee that everybody will always be empowered and fulfilled and happy, because it's really an inside job. Again, not to say that I'm advocating for not taking reasonable steps to produce uh, conditions and circumstances that support general well-being and a sense of being connected, and that honor people and listen to people and respect people. I think that's all wonderful and important. However, it's not the real solution to the problem. In fact, yeah, I won't say any more about that. So have I said, okay, so what have I said? I think, what is learned helplessness? What are some of the consequences of learned helplessness? Have I really touched on that? I've kind of touched on that. I mean, basically, when a person has learned helplessness in the domain of their life in which they experience that, they will be either unable to even perceive options and choices that are available to them, So those things will basically be virtually invisible, or even if they can see those things, they will feel as though they are not able to access those things. So like a person who has learned helplessness in relationship, they may be able to, on some level, acknowledge that the possibility in the theory exists that they could make some change in some way, whether that's just leaving the relationship or creating and establishing and enforcing boundaries for themselves or whatever it may be. They may have some idea that that exists in theory, but they will have no sense that they can do that whatsoever. They will have all whatever their reasons and excuses for that are. It will seem to them that that's not possible for them. And as I said, in many cases, people will not even be able to recognize that those possibilities exist. They will be virtually invisible for that person. As strange as it may seem, it's sort of like, for probably for some of the dogs where they're in the cage and all they have to do is just take a step and they will be freed of the shocks. For some of them, maybe they're able to, in their own way, recognize that that step exists and it's possible, but it's not possible for them. And for some of them, they can't even recognize that it exists. The cage. There might as well be a wall there that is impossible to move through because they cannot even recognize that the possibility exists. So, in that state of learned helplessness, people either don't recognize options or they don't recognize that those options are accessible to them. So, as a result, people will keep themselves stuck. And when people keep themselves stuck, well, then they're going to experience a lot of unwanted things as a result of that, right? So, I mean, think about when you feel stuck in life, how do you feel? What is your experience? And that will give you an idea of some of the possible experiences that would flow out of learned helplessness. Now, that's just some of the experiences that come to mind for you now. That doesn't mean that it's an exhaustive list of all of the types of experiences that could come as a result of learned helplessness, but it's some of them. So this has, in my view, it has really far-reaching implications. I think maybe if I've made the case well, then you can also recognize that this is probably very widespread, and you probably experience it. You can probably recognize how this shows up in other people you know. Please don't lecture those people, by the way, because that will definitely not help. Uh, you know, just like sort out your own stuff and be an example. And if people ask you, then if people are like, "Hey, what? I noticed you're different. What have you done?" Then feel free to let them know at that point. But don't go telling people, "Hey, you know about this learning helpless. And I've noticed that you seem to be really helpless in these areas. Let me help you out. I'll be your savior." Don't do that. That won't go over well. Um, so I've talked about what it is, what the consequences of it are. Hopefully you've been able to recognize that you probably experienced some of this in your life. So then the question is, uh, what might somebody do about it? Well, fundamentally, when you think back to the experiment that I described with the dogs. So eventually, the dogs in Group B, when they had enough experience of being moved to the side where they did not have the shocks, it finally dawned on them that that was a possible option for them and that they could do it. Now, I'm sure it varied from dog to dog, but on average, it required many more repetitions before that new conditioning became established. The new conditioning of, oh, it's possible for me to take action to help myself, than it did of uh, the what created the learned helplessness in the first place. In other words, it took, let's say, X number of repetitions of experiencing the shock and not being able to do anything about it in order to establish learned helplessness. And then it took Y repetitions of being moved to the side and not getting the shocks before the dog realized that they actually had the power to help themselves. And Y was greater than X. So it takes more repetitions on average of having some kind of experience that shines a light and reveals that there is something that you can do to replace the conditioning of learned helplessness. Hopefully that's clear. So now there are, I'm sure, many other things that could be said about this, but this is just the angle I want to take on it, is that at a very fundamental level, when you have enough repetitions of, we'll just call it empowerment or options, that will dissolve the learned helplessness, and it will establish in you the new conditioning of empowerment. So the basic thing that I'm communicating here is that you need repetition of empowering experiences. Now, I guess on some level that seems kind of obvious, right? I mean, it's like, and maybe you say, well, gee, duh, right? Like if I had enough, if you feel powerless when it comes to money, let's say, then it kind of seems obvious that if you had, a couple hundred experiences where you pulled a lever and you got $1 million, then you would probably at that point be like, yeah, okay, I think I'm okay. I think I get it now. Pull the lever, get $1 million. Pull the lever, get $1 million. Pull the lever, get $1 million. I think I got it. I think I'm empowered now. I know how to handle this. I'm no longer powerless when it comes to money, right? So that seems kind of obvious. The challenge would be that how does one have those experiences, right? If you're in a position where you feel like there's nothing I can do, I've tried, nothing works for me, I know it's hopeless for me. It's I'm better off not doing anything because anytime I try to do anything, it just gets worse for me. It's really painful to try and do anything. It's just a complete disaster. So therefore, I will not do anything. Um, to go from there to I can do something and get positive results seems like too big of a leap. How does one cross that wide, uh, uh, cavernous depth? Right? I mean, it's sort of like trying to cross the Grand Canyon in a single bound. How does one do that? It seems it's just too much. So if that's what you're thinking, then I hear you, and I'm not going to leave you hanging. Not sure if that maybe that's a mixed metaphor, but uh, hopefully that makes sense. So that's one thing. Now the other thing. So basically, I'm gonna propose to you two basic things that I think can be really helpful. One of them is to establish for yourself sufficient examples um, that of empowerment. The other thing, which I'm going to touch on first, is that reframing the whole thing, I think, can be really helpful. And you might be saying, what do you mean reframing the whole thing? Well, I'll explain. But these are the two things. Okay, so one is reframing, and the other one is to establish for yourself that you have sufficient examples of empowerment. So I'll walk you through those two things. So the first thing is, like I said, a reframe of the whole thing. So if you think about a situation in your life in which you feel helpless, where you feel powerless, then the uh, the the frame that you're viewing that from, if you notice, is one in which uh, you say, look, there's a particular outcome that I want or that I'm supposed to have, and I'm unable to get that. You're probably not thinking this consciously, but this is the basic frame that you're probably operating from. There's this thing that I want, I'm unable to get it, unable to have that. And that frame keeps this whole thing stuck. I mean, it doesn't have to, but it does tend to keep the whole thing stuck. So What if we change the frame? And now there are lots of different ways you could reframe this, but I'm going to propose to you one that I think can be really valuable. What if you said, this is a situation that I have not fully understood yet. I'm just pausing so you could try that on. So think of a situation in your life where you feel powerless and just see what happens if you reframe that for yourself as this is a situation that I have not fully understood yet. Now, it's possible for some of you, you'll be like, oh my goodness, that totally changes everything. I'm not expecting that most of you will have that experience, right? Most of you will be like, oh, yeah, okay. Pretty, maybe there's some subtle shift, but I'm not expecting it's going to be, a total instantaneous transformation like the heavens part and angels choirs and kind of thing. Could be very subtle, but just notice that that's actually quite different. So because you could probably acknowledge that this is a situation that you don't fully understand, right? I mean, if you fully understood it, then you would be having a different experience, right? Like if it's a money thing, if you're struggling with money, you're like, when it comes to money, I just seem to be powerless. Every once in a while I get a little bit lucky, but like just lucky enough that I'm still here, still eking out my existence. I haven't yet starved to death or frozen to death, but I really have not figured it out enough to know that, oh, there's the lever, pull the lever, get the money. I haven't figured that out yet, right? So it's a situation that you have not yet fully understood. And then you can think about, are there any things in your life that at one time you did not fully understand, and now you do understand them well enough that you have, let's say, sufficient mastery in order to achieve whatever it is you want in that area of your life. Like, and these might seem trivial, but I'm giving what might seem like relatively trivial examples, just because then you'll probably agree that you have gained sufficient understanding in these. So, like, have you learned to ride a bicycle? Now, maybe not all of you have, but many of you, I would think, probably have learned to ride a bicycle. Was there a time in your life when you had not yet fully understood how to ride a bicycle? Well, obviously. So you have examples in your life when you did not yet fully understand something. And of course, had you stopped there, then you would probably never have gotten to the point where you are now, where you have sufficient understanding and mastery to be able to achieve what you are able to achieve in that domain of your life, right? Like if you had given up on riding a bicycle because you said, I'm incapable of doing it, it will never work for me. I'm not capable. I'm not worth it. I can see other people can do it, but I just seem to be thwarted at every turn. Um, there's no point. Then you would probably not have learned to ride a bicycle. However, if you did learn to ride a bicycle, then you have evidence that there's at least one thing in your life that you did not fully understand, and yet, despite the fact that you did not fully understand it at that time, you understand it well enough now that you're able to ride a bicycle. Now, again, that might seem trivial, but if you start to think about it, I'm sure you come up with lots of examples of things that you did not understand sufficiently well, that now you understand well enough that you're able to get decent results in that area. So if you reframe this in this thing in your life where you feel powerless in that way, then this could really change things, because instead of it being this thing is like, I want this outcome and I'm unable to get the outcome. I'm powerless. It suddenly becomes a different thing. So you're in a way, this is it's creating a larger frame for it in probably multiple ways, but in one way, in time, right? So it's not just, well, you know I can't I can't do it because I'm not having the outcome I want right now, therefore I can't do it. I tried in the past and I didn't get the outcome I wanted, therefore it's impossible. You can create a larger context, a larger time frame, and realize, well, this is a situation I have not yet fully understood. The implication being, well, but I could in the future. So then when you think about it that way, and you realize that you have lots of examples of things that you at one time did not understand yet, that you do now understand sufficiently well to get the outcomes that you want in regard to those things, then you start to realize, well, if this is like those things, then uh, probably I will be able to resolve this in a way similar to how I resolved other things. So might seem small, but this one change can be really powerful. And notice what this is really doing is it's shifting it to learning. So instead of it being about the outcome, and I know that we often are very focused on outcomes. Like, I need to have the candy bar. I need the candy bar. I need the candy bar. I need it now. I needed it yesterday. I need the candy bar. I don't have the candy bar yet. Therefore, I'm a failure. I need the candy bar. I don't have it yet. Therefore, I'll never succeed. So the focus, when the focus is on the particular outcome, then instead of the process, instead of the learning, then, and I'm not saying that having some attention on outcome can be valuable. If there's no outcome, then in mind, then it's very difficult to have a direction. So I'm not suggesting drop the outcome entirely, but rather, um, let the if the outcome is held more loosely, and there's, instead of success being determined by an outcome right now, success can be redefined as progress and in learning. Then I think that is very helpful for shifting from learned helplessness and for creating resilience. Because remember what I said earlier is that the conditions do not determine whether a person will learn helplessness. The power does not exist out there. The power is within you. It's always within you. And it has a lot to do with how you're thinking about it and how you're defining things. So if you define your okayness and your success based on whether you have the particular outcome now, that's less resilient. It's rather fragile, because there are things there that maybe you just can't control. I mean, we could argue whether you can or you can't, but at the very least, it's like, right now, do you perceive that honestly you have the ability to control the weather halfway across the world? I mean, really, apart from any theoretical uh, ideas or arguments, do you really believe right now, through sheer force of will, you can determine successfully the weather halfway across the world? And if so, demonstrate it. Probably not, right? And that's not to say that you might not be able to develop that skill. It's just that right now you probably don't really have certainty and confidence that you can do that. So then, if you are focused on the particular outcome, but that outcome is external and it's subject to all kinds of things, including weather patterns, then that's a very difficult situation, right? Because you say, well, my okayness depends upon my sense of empowerment depends upon this particular outcome, but that outcome is dependent upon things that I don't presently perceive that I have the ability to control. Well, then there you go. You're putting yourself in a position where you are highly susceptible to learning helplessness. But if instead you bring the focus to an internal focus and you say, well, look, forget about all that. Like, yes, I have a goal. I have an outcome that I have in mind that I'm working toward. I'm holding that loosely. That is my map. It's my guide. It's how I know what direction I'm taking. So I'm not just giving that up, but I'm keeping the focus internal. Where I have where I am empowered, I can choose. So that's a very resilient position to be in because then, regardless of what's happening externally, you can always choose to learn. You can always choose to take whatever's happening as feedback. So, it's like if I'm wanting a particular outcome and then there's something that happens apparently outside of me that I apparently don't know how to control, and that seems to have a significant effect on my ability in the moment to achieve the external goal that I'm wanting, that particular outcome. Instead of feeling powerless, instead of just saying, I knew it, it'll never work out for me. I've tried so hard, I've tried everything, and it just doesn't work out for me. Instead of that, I can notice, okay, how can I use this as feedback so that I can learn something? Because as long as I'm learning, as long as I'm staying connected to my empowerment, then I can continue to take steps. So I'm not powerless, I'm empowered. Now, maybe I'm not getting the outcome that I think I want on the time frame that I think I wanted, but that doesn't mean that I'm powerless. It just means that I'm in the process of learning. And everything that I'm experiencing is offering me feedback so that I can learn more. And if I'm playing the long game instead of saying, I need to have it now, instead of it being, it's not fair. I didn't get the candy bar. I need the candy bar now. I can't believe that we left the grocery store without the candy bar. Life is a disaster. Life is over for me. Uh, then instead of that, it could be, okay, wow, I'm feeling disappointment. Uh, and there's so much for me to discover and learn in this. Like notice how I've been thinking about it. Notice how I was, how much uh, I was relying on that candy bar, and what was I thinking that candy bar was going to give me? Maybe I still want the candy bar, but now that the reality is showing me that I didn't get the candy bar this time, okay, so let's regroup and come up with a new plan. A lot of possibilities that can be empowering. So that's the first thing. That's the second thing. First thing, there I'm reversing the order. So the second thing, no, the first thing, which is now the second in order, is to have sufficient examples of empowerment. Now, of course, just by redefining things or reframing things, as I suggested already, then immediately you probably have lots of examples, right? So if it's no longer about the outcome, but instead it's about learning, and if it's not about what I have right now in terms of objective measures, but if it's instead about the empowerment and the learning and the process inwardly that allows me to know that I have that I have that empowerment and that I can make choices to help myself moving forward in my life, then immediately I already have probably lots and lots of examples of exactly that. So that was part of the reason why I suggest the reframe, because if we reframe it as this is a situation in which I don't yet have complete understanding, then suddenly I have lots of examples of situations in which I did not previously have complete understanding. But so what? Like that was just opportunities for learning, and I did learn, and I've benefited from that. So then I can see that what I'm experiencing right now is just like that, which means this is not a disaster. It's not a bad thing. It's actually helpful feedback that's helping me in my growth and learning so that I can be even more empowered. So immediately I suddenly have all of these examples because all of the things that I've done in the past, all the experiences I've had in the past that were just like this, where I didn't yet have the complete understanding, and yet it actually was good. So that's one thing. And also, um, it's possible to even if we still keep the focus um, to some degree on whatever this particular situation is. So let's say that it's the feeling disempowered in or powerless in relationship. Feeling like, oh well, I don't matter anyway, and nobody cares about me, and I'm worthless, and I can never get what I want, and if I try, then people will just be upset with me, and I'll just be punished, and then I'll be alone, and even it'll be even harder. Whatever the thinking is. Okay, so if that's the situation I find myself in, then um, along with the reframe that I described, I can also keep some attention on that narrower frame and look for examples in which I I have um, been empowered to make choices in relationship in the past and in the future. This is a really interesting thing. So a lot of the time, what happens is that as a result of this learned helplessness, it becomes this very black and white, all or nothing kind of thinking. It's like there's no sense in doing anything unless I can have the complete fantasy outcome now. It's like why bother? Why bother? It's like if I'm not going to be able to just have everybody love me and approve of me and be nice to me all the time, then what's the point? Why bother? So it's this very all or nothing kind of thinking. Um, and yet, if you start to look for examples in the past in which, in a smaller way, maybe in a much smaller way, you actually were empowered, where you actually did make choices in that domain, in this example, in relationships, this will start to be helpful. And you can start to find, if you really look sincerely, and might not always be pleasant or comfortable to discover all of the examples, because some of them might not be pleasant examples. Sometimes the examples that you'll find in this particular scenario that I'm describing of relationships and making choices in relationships, sometimes it's like you realize, wow, I've been making all kinds of choices they're really not working out well for me, right? So it might not be comfortable, but it's nonetheless can be empowering to realize, wow, yeah, I didn't say anything yesterday, and I didn't say anything the day before, and I acquiesced the day before that, and I hid the day before that, and I pretended like I wanted something that I didn't want the day before that. You're like, wow, I've been making a lot of choices in relationship. That's amazing. I really have a lot of power to make choices because I'm doing it all the time. So when you start to look for the example, and they won't all be negative, because you can also start to find in small ways that you make all kinds of positive choices. But the tendency with learned helplessness is to dismiss them, trivialize them. It's like, yeah, that doesn't count for anything because it didn't give the complete result. This vague fantasy outcome that you want. You say, yeah, but none of the choices really seem to make any difference, so they don't count. They become invisible. Yeah, I'm incapable of making any choices. I'm incapable. I have no power because none of the things that I've done gave me the complete results, complete fantasy results. But see the fallacy in that, because just because something that you where you exercise power and you made a choice didn't give you the complete results that you think you want doesn't mean that you're powerless. It just means that the steps that you took didn't yet give you the complete results that you want. That's all it means, if even. But the part that's usually overlooked in learned helplessness is the fact that you have power and you use that power and you make choices. Isn't that interesting? Right. So when you start to find those examples and and instead of dismissing them or trivializing them, you just acknowledge them. You don't have to glorify them. You don't have to turn them into anything other than what they are, but just to start to acknowledge them will start to give you lots of evidence that you do have power. You have choice. You exercise that on a very regular basis. And uh, then that will start to shift things and you'll realize not necessarily on a rational level, although it could happen rationally, but just on a like a subconscious level, it will start to click and you'll realize, wow, I actually have power. I actually can make choices. I actually can do things to help myself. And when you do that, you will likely find that you start to make more and more choices that are congruent with what you really want. So just hear that I'm not suggesting that it is often not useful or necessary to take outer actions. Of course it is. But usually in learned helplessness, those actions are either not visible or the person will perceive that they have no ability to take those actions. So first is to establish for yourself the clarity that you actually are empowered, that you actually do have, not only do you have power, but you use the power all the time, just that you've been using it unconsciously against yourself. And that will allow you to start to see the options available to you and to have the courage to take some of those actions. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Hopefully that's clear. If it's not, then during the group coaching that follows, I invite you to, for those who are live, here live, then you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. And so stay tuned for that. For those who are here live, we'll do the group coaching. For those who will watch us on YouTube, then I'm going to end this recording momentarily. So just want to say a few parting words to the viewers on YouTube. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you. I am grateful for you taking the time to be here and for your interest in knowing yourself. I believe that together we can support one another in self-knowledge and fulfillment. So I really appreciate your participation. And if you're interested in joining these calls live, then I welcome you to do that. And you can get the information to join live by signing up on my website, joylot.com. Right now, there's an offer for a free ebook, which covers 5 of the uh, fundamental universal laws which govern creation. And it's a really valuable read, which I think you will find quite helpful. And in addition, when you sign up for that, you will also get the information automatically emailed to you so that you can join these meetings live. And when you do, you'll also have the opportunity to stay on for the group coaching that follows. So I encourage you to check that out. It's at joeylot.com, and I'll leave a link in the description on YouTube. For those who are interested in my support in helping you to achieve your goals in a harmonious way so that you can really know what you want and achieve those things that matter most to you so that you can experience uh, the real satisfaction of that. You may be interested in the Manifesting Truth program, which is a paid program that I offer. You can get more information about that at joeylot.com/manifesting-truth, and I'll provide the link to that as well in the description on YouTube. So I'm going to end the recording. So for those watching on YouTube, blessings to you. Thank you, and bye for now.